Welcome, everyone. My name is Sylvan Kaufman. I'm your moderator for today. I'm a volunteer with the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council, one of the organizations co-sponsoring this webinar series. I'd like to welcome everyone today to Dirty Streets to Dirty BMPs, maintaining clean stormwater BMPs along roadways. It's one of many webinars that we're offering this year in a series called A Focus on Sustainability. This series was developed in 2013 by a group of organizations known regionally in the United States for their education programs for professionals in the landscaping industries and landscape design. We're working together to expand the reach of these education programs through this webinar series. In case you're not familiar with the sponsoring organizations, they're all nonprofit groups and largely volunteer. They're the Ecological Landscaping Alliance, ELA, in the northeastern United States, the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council, CCLC, in the Chesapeake Bay region, and Eco Landscapes California. So we welcome attendees from across the country for our webinars. So today I'm very pleased to welcome Mary Travaglini. She directs and oversees inspection, maintenance, and repair of green stormwater infrastructure for Montgomery County, Maryland, including green roofs, pervious pavement, bioretention, and rain gardens. She sees firsthand the impacts of stormwater and human use of our built environment on stormwater facilities and uses her observations to inform better design, construction, and maintenance of these practices. So I think you'll see some examples in her talk today. Mary has degrees in natural resources and landscape architecture and has previous experience with invasive plant management, trail construction, and landscape design, all of which she applies to her work in stormwater management. And she says she still drinks local tap water despite knowing where it came from. So I'm very pleased to welcome Mary. I've known Mary for a long time, since she worked with the Nature Conservancy. And so I'm glad that she stayed in the area and is now working for Montgomery County. So Mary, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sylvan. I'll give it a minute to make sure that folks will be able to see my screen. I've got to click on this little thing. There we go. And that's to the side. All right. I'll just give it a quick second, Sylvan, in case you've got technical issues, but is my screen coming up for you, Sylvan?
Yeah, your screen looks good, and nobody has reported any technical issues, so I think you're good to go.
Okay, great. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I don't have any polls in the beginning to be able to ask what sort of disciplines or parts of the country you're coming from, but if you have questions during the webinar and also after the webinar, feel free to contact me with any questions that I can help with. But I'm going to speak very heavily to maintenance of green infrastructure that's along roadways. So now that a lot of municipalities are transferring to ESD and LID practices, we now have to deal with the roadways instead of piping them off to the stormwater ponds or streams. Things are more localized and right there at the curb. So I'm going to speak a lot to that, and I'm going to speak less to the systems that are not along roadways, which are a lot less maintenance. So I'm going to go into that, and then if there's time at the end, I'm going to have a little separate piece of my presentation to talk about some design exercises that help us inform what maintenance is going to do along these things. So just give you a brief overview of what we've got in the county. The county of Montgomery County is over 1 million people, and it's a rather large area, very diverse area in terms of development as well. But we have over 11,432 facilities that are permitted by the county, and that means that they have to be inspected by the county as well to enforce that they are working. About 40% of those facilities that we have are actually maintained either fully or partially by the county themselves, both on public property and within what we call our transfer program, where private property owners can transfer their stormwater facilities into our program, where we maintain the structural part of the facility and they maintain the landscape part of the facility. Of those practices, we're quickly going to see that we're going to reach probably 50% or more in terms of those practices being ESD or LID practices. They're the small practices, they're green, typically have things growing in them. So the number keeps growing, but right now about 42% of our permitted practices are within this category. And I think we're going to see that across the country as well. This is a list of how that breaks out. You can see the bulk of the practices that are permitted are dry wells, rather large number there. The two columns here, the permitted are the ones that have to go through permitting services. It means they're regulated by law. The Rainscapes projects are voluntary projects that the county assists with funding for people to do on a voluntary basis. Our second largest number is in the bioretention, microbioretention, bioswale rain garden group, and that is forever growing as well. And then, of course, we have dry swales, microinfiltration, pervious pavement, tree boxes, green roofs, and rain barrels and cisterns, sort of going down the line in terms of the numbers of practices that we have. In Maryland, every state is different, but in Maryland, there's different names for how things are categorized, starting with the bottom in terms of the green infiltration practices. We have rain gardens, then landscape infiltration, then microbioretention and bioretention. As we go up in those terms, they have more structural components and a larger drainage area in there. So the rain gardens are going to be smaller and have less structural components and also have less water. And the bioretentions at the top have a lot more structural components and are draining larger areas. The bioretention gardens and rain gardens are the terms that we use most often, and I'll probably just refer to them as bios or rain gardens throughout the presentation for the ease of maintenance or ease of the presentation. So what is bioretention or rain gardens? It's really biomimicry we're using to restore the water cycles of our urbanized areas. We're essentially trying to make them act like the woods or the meadows would have done. Typically they have a gravel storage base underneath a very loose planting media that's then planted on the top, and then some of them have under drains or over drains that are taking excess water out of them. But the idea is that water is flowed and cooled and cleaned before it makes it back out to the streams. It can work very well when it's designed right and if there's a maintenance program going on with it. So these are some photos of well-maintained working bioretentions or rain gardens that we have around the county. So what is maintenance? Maintenance, if you take it out of the dictionary, this is what you see. And this is what a lot of people forget that we need within our systems and our budgets and our programs. But a lot of this is, basically protecting them against the influences that are on them, preserve them in the state that they're in, and keep them from declining. So this is what our program is doing on a daily basis. So I think it's really important that everybody makes a case for a maintenance budget when they're designing and permitting and enforcing these things. It's no different than some of the infrastructure that we have within our homes, within our systems. So, you can see a dirty sink on the left and a clean sink on the right. This is what we have to do. If we're going to use a bathroom, we have to clean it. If we're going to use a ship, we have to clean the holes. If we're going to use our cast iron pots, we have to take care of them. And there's nothing different about the landscaping budget, and I think we just have to start to get that into people's minds and make sure that we're not building things without a maintenance budget. So quick review of all the things that are in stormwater, and again, I'm going to focus a lot along the roadways, some of the major impacts that I have. So the upper left-hand corner picture, you can see in the gutter pan a lot of spallings. That's all asphalt and concrete. That's literally just the road wearing away. In Montgomery County, we don't use sand on our roads. So everything that you see there is just the road falling apart, and all of that ends up into our stormwater systems. We have huge volumes of leaves and grass clippings and organic materials that are falling into our roadways as well. They're contributing nitrogen and phosphorus because if they're not degrading on soil, they're going straight into our water bodies, which end up in the Chesapeake Bay. Then we have tons of suspended solids, especially things like trash. We've got that no matter where you are, but as you get into more urbanized areas, there just tends to be a higher volume of trash for multiple reasons. Then there's the chemicals, a lot of these things that people don't actually see that are going into the water. So we've got heavy winter salting that happens around here. Every time you hit the brakes on your car, heavy metals fall off of those brakes and end up on the roadways and then in our stormwater. We've got all sorts of pesticides and fertilizers that are running off of lawns, plenty of hydrocarbons, petrochemicals, and soaps that are coming off of our vehicles and coming off of our buildings and coming off of illicit discharge as well. And again, all of that is impacting what goes in there. Then there's even more unseen things like the bacteria that's coming off of trash cans and from animal waste. We've got superheated roads when the sun is shining on them, and that heats up the water, which can impact aquatic life. And then, of course, we have the concentrated stormwater, which is one of the largest issues as well in terms of the health of our streams. So these are some pictures of some of the things that we clean out on a regular basis from our roadside stormwater systems. The upper left-hand picture, if you can see, it has tons of cigarette butts and just organic debris. We've got trash, we've got sediment. The lower left-hand picture, that bucket, is the type of sediment we get when water mains break. And so instead of the water main breaks now going straight to a stream outfall, they're going into our roadside LID, and we have to clean those up as well. So lots of things people don't think about. Google isn't driving cars for us yet, so we get vehicles in it. We've got people in them. We've got kids in them. You name it, we've got the impact. So sediment is a huge issue. As I showed you before, there's a lot of sediment, but also when we push snow around, there's a lot of sediment that ends up in that snow. And this sediment pile is actually in the inlet of a road or a parking lot bioretention, and all of that sediment in that picture came in with the snow that was being pushed directly into the facility. We did a study a few years ago of roadway sediment within the county, and they looked at multiple sites where we had roadside LID. They took, right before our crew would go out on a monthly basis, they would take out and measure the volume and weight of the sediment, and then they characterized the nitrogen in it as well. But they would take this out, dry it down, and found that for every inlet, they were getting 4 to 9 pounds of dry sediment every month. That meant for every inlet, it was 52 to 104 pounds of dry sediment per year. And then we multiplied it by the number of roadway LIDs that we had at the time, and it meant that we were taking out quite a few tons of dry sediment per year just of what was coming off the roadways. And that's pretty significant. So just a quick stop there before I get into maintenance. Sylvan, is there any questions so far?
Anyone have, there are no questions appearing yet, so I think you can go ahead.
Okay, great. No problem, great. So here's some pictures of things that need maintenance. This is the stuff that I'll discover every time I go out somewhere, which is inlets getting clogged up, invasive plants or just weeds in general moving in, under drain caps that have been damaged by cars, kids, you name it, mowers. So those are some pictures of what needs maintenance. These are some pictures of facilities that have really good maintenance going on that we ideally would like to see that. But of course, a lot of these pictures are summertime at the height of growth when we use these to show the public this is what it's going to look like. And of course, we all know it doesn't look like this all the time, even when it is well maintained. But just some pictures of the types of things that keep them going. So maintenance requires a lot of labor. We know that about all things. This is a list of all the types of things that we're doing on a regular basis. The things towards the top we're doing on a regular basis, like weeding and pruning, taking out leaves and trash, mowing and edging them, just redistributing mulch after storm. Some of these in here, like fully rebuilding them or fully replanting them or patching erosion, are on an as-needed basis, but they're something that we always need to be able to budget for in all of our facilities. We have some charts, and people use different ways like this to try to show folks this is what you need to do to maintain different types of facilities and what you would be doing throughout the season. There's lots of different tasks, and some of them are once a year, and some of them are every single month out of the year. And that's something that, again, not only with budgeting, but figuring out how you're going to structure your program is really important. Mosquito prevention in our region and across a lot of the East Coast now is very important, and a lot of that comes back to design, but also if you have an issue with clogging or sedimentation that has blocked something, we can start breeding things. And you know, if we have tadpoles, we know that the water's long enough there to have mosquitoes as well. You know, fortunately, there were some tadpoles to eat them, but you can see the picture in the upper left. The kids were actually in the inlet playing with the tadpoles, which means the water's just there a tad too long. Just want to go through some design features that make a difference for maintenance. There's all sorts of different ways that people are controlling sediment in these, different designs of check dams, and different types of vegetation. So I'm going to go rather quickly through the next set of slides just to give you an idea of the diversity of types of things that we're dealing with and that you may deal with as well. So sediment forebays, these are all different kinds of forebays that are in our LID practices. Now we have to recognize that these small LID practices, particularly along roadsides, they really don't have a traditional forebay. There's no room for a traditional forebay within them. So the facility itself is almost a forebay in and of itself, but we'll essentially have these micro forebays, and these are the different types of forebays that we see within our facilities. So this is one type where the water just drops over and it dissipates a little bit of the energy as it comes out, and there's a concrete pad where we can scrape the sediment off. And I just put on here pros and cons of the different types of things with these different forebays. Another forebay is not too different from that, where there's a pad that the sediment can drop out, but also with the flow of water coming in, we're trying to have it bump up against this little Z-shaped inlet curbing so that it will sort of slow it down and capture that sediment. You can see, though, even after a big storm, it will push the sediment past that area if you're not cleaning it out regularly. Then we just have flat concrete forebays where water literally just goes into them. There is no dropout. There might be cobble then to dissipate the energy. And then we have some that have weirs. The picture in the upper right, you can see it's a large sort of plastic weir that can be lifted out. And on the bottom left, you can see where that weir was pulled up and the amount of sediment that got captured behind it. So the weir has holes so that we're not holding water within the inlet, but we're holding sediment within the inlet that we can then go and clean that out rather than have it get in the facility. They do their job quite well sometimes, but they quickly fill up, especially along roadways, with the amount of organics and inorganics that come into them. So on a monthly basis, we need to keep cleaning these out, otherwise they very quickly get filled up. And also, sediment will move past these forebays. Again, the volumes of sediment from roadways can be really heavy, and if you have sand in your community for winter use, you're going to have even more than we do. But again, here's just some pictures of sedimentation where it's moved beyond the forebay. This is after winter where, you know, heavy winter storms, et cetera, we haven't been out there maintaining, and that's how much sediment gets past the forebay and into there. It's rather large volumes. So one thing we do is we are constantly clearing the sediment and debris from the inlets, and we also clean upstream of the inlet. So after the next storm, whatever's within the 5 to 10 feet above that inlet ideally isn't flowing into it. Otherwise, it's a little bit harder to clean out. We're cleaning out the sediment from the cleaning pads below the inlets. When the stones past the inlets are filled by approximately 75%, then we're lifting the stone out, taking the sediment out, and then putting the stone back in. And then, of course, this has to be taken off site. There's nowhere nearby to just toss it. So it goes into the trash or into a compost facility. Most likely, it's going to go into the trash if it's not leaves. And then, as I mentioned, we have to reset the cobble, clean that out. So the upper left-hand picture is when the voids have been filled, 75%, and then the right-hand picture is a gentleman taking the stones out and then putting them back in after, and then they're clean after that, and we've taken that, and it's ready for the next several storms. Without frequent maintenance, our inlets can look like the one at the top, and with frequent maintenance, they look like the ones at the bottom. We also have trench drains that feed facilities, and people often forget about drains that are not immediately adjacent to their facilities. So it's always important to go upstream and look at where the water comes from and clean those out as well. We're constantly taking trash out of them, as mentioned, as well as debris and leaves from within the facility. And if we can capture that at the inlet, it's going to save us a lot more work before it moves past the inlets. We also have to take trash and debris from control structures. So there are flow splitters that go to some of these. And again, we've got to have our crew know what's upstream so that they can go and lift the manholes and clean them. And then also facility control structures sometimes have trash in them, and it's not just from stormwater. And the bottom left-hand picture would be kids throwing stuff in there because those large bottles did not fit through those grates unless somebody forced them through there. So we've always got to look at all of our upstream and downstream control structures to take trash out of that. of leaf and natural debris, it's the time of year in our area where leaves have started to fall, and we are taking out large volumes of weeds. And because stormwater facilities are usually lower than the surrounding grades, they sometimes get even more leaves in them because things like to blow down downhill and into them. So that's a large job in the fall that has to be factored in our region. Any questions, Sylvan?
Please remember, audience attendees, that you can type in your question box anytime, and when Mary pauses for questions, I'll relay your question to her. Mary, are you going to talk about what happens when sediments do get past the forebays?
I can answer that question right now. And when it gets past the forebay, we've got to clean it out. So all sediment removal is usually a manual job, and they're usually doing it with shovels, although theoretically you could do it with a shop vac or something along those lines. But when it moves past the sediment, it has to be taken out. So if it's caught up between plants, sometimes they'll use a leaf blower, and they'll be very careful about how they're doing it, but they'll push the sediment back up into an area where they can clear it out. And if it's a flat surface, then they scrape the sediment off using a shovel and take it out that way.
Okay, and then we have one other question. Who pays for the maintenance? Is it the owner or the county?
It's the owner, and the county is the owner of many facilities, but maintenance has to be in everyone's budget. So we have a large budget within the county to maintain all of our ponds and sand filters and LID practices, as well as our underground facilities. And the funding for that comes out of what's called our water quality protection charge. It's a fee that shows up on people's property bills each year, and that goes into the funding for the maintenance. And then private property owners have to figure out their own way to budget for maintenance, whether they're an HOA or a commercial property or a residential property.
Okay, and then a couple other questions. They're coming in now. Which structures are the least versus most difficult to clean?
I guess I need whoever asked that to clarify if you're talking about LID structures or if you're talking about all types of stormwater facilities.
Okay, I'll give them a chance to get back to us. And then another question from Virginia Rockwell. Let's see, she was asking where the removed sediment goes and whether you continue to analyze the sediment on a tracking basis to see if phosphorus and pesticide bans are actually working and helping.
So the sediment goes usually straight to the trash, and weeds will go to the compost, and we don't have any funding mechanisms at the time to continue to monitor what is in the sediment. There are folks out there doing research at the university level or perhaps at the federal government level that look at some of that a little bit more than we do, but we don't have any monitoring right now for that.
Okay. And going back to the previous question, which structures are the least most difficult to clean? Casey Lee Bastian's referring to LID structures.
Okay, so for LID structures, I would say that the farther it is from the impervious paved surface, the lower the maintenance. So if it's coming off of let's say it's coming off of a roof and going through a pipe and going into a facility, that's usually a lower maintenance facility. And if it's sheet flowing off of a field, for example, and into an LID facility, that automatically is going to lower it. And then for the ones that are slightly larger and accommodate trees and accommodate a tree canopy, not necessarily canopy trees, but a tree canopy and a shaded tree canopy, those are my lowest maintenance of all, because I don't have issues with perennials. I don't have problems with weeds quite as much because of the shading, and I have more of a sort of a biological activity that's going on in there where they're slightly more naturalized. So for me, those are the much lower maintenance than anything that is planted with perennials and is along a roadway. And then ones, if they are planted with perennials, the ones that have like grass monocultures are very low maintenance up until they need to be pruned. And then when you need to prune them, the pruning work is quite a bit more, but we don't have as much in the way of weeds as well.
Okay, interesting.
And aesthetics is, the more that they should be maintained for aesthetics because they're in front of people's homes or businesses, the higher maintenance they're going to be, just like any other garden.
And more demand from the person who's looking.
Yeah, it's kind of the difference between an annual bed that is anchoring a entrance to a shopping center versus a forest in terms of the type of maintenance. It's kind of, those kinds of variabilities.
Okay. And then we have another question related to fees, whether the water protection, let's see, the question is, was the water protection fee a utilities fee or an environmental specific levy, and is it charged to all property owners?
It is. I could be wrong about this. All the stuff's on our website, but I believe we call it a utility fee. It is not through our water utility, though, because we have a separate stormwater system, and so some counties or some places that have a combined CSO system, it may come from their water provider, but in this case, it doesn't come. But it's not a levy; it's a utility fee that we've had, I believe, since the 90s. It's been around a while. It used to be charged only to residential properties, and the laws changed about 2 years ago, and commercial properties now pay that fee as well.
Okay. And then one last question in this section. Are sediment cleanout indicator gauges used in forebays or best management practices to provide a visual for required maintenance?
They are not, and again, a lot of these things are on such a micro scale that there's just, after every storm, there's sediment. So there's always going to be something to remove, and except in the deep of the winter, since we're out there on a monthly basis, we are taking it out on a monthly basis. Right now, though, we don't have a setup where we are doing things that might come to mind, like going out and cleaning them right before the next storm, or getting to them right after a storm so that the next time the next storm comes through, it doesn't push it any farther. We literally just get to them on a monthly basis right now.
Okay. That's all the questions for now.
All right. So just as I mentioned with the inlets, we have different types of check dams that are used, particularly when there's any flow through within a facility. Flow-through facilities like bioswales, especially along roadways, are exceedingly difficult to maintain because they have a constant flow of water. They don't just get the first flush from the storm, fill up, and then stop accommodating water. They have water constantly flowing through them. So a lot of scour can happen, and to try to prevent that scour, different types of check dams are used to prevent that, but they also require maintenance. So we have concrete check dams, which visually not everybody prefers because they are more of an urban look, but these are built in. They can be used to reinforce the curb as well as providing that scour flow through. Water can undermine them if they're not built well. It makes it a little more difficult if you do have to do a large maintenance within it, but that is one style of check dams. Another style of check dams that's used are gravel check dams. These are basically soil and gravel that are packed together to create more of what I would call a berm than a check dam. And they lock together pretty well. They're pretty resistant to erosion. They're even relatively resistant to cars driving over them because they have to be a little bit more bulky, and so they provide a larger apron if something is traveling over it. Water can't get through them, much like a concrete check dam. Water's not going to get through them. It's going to have to go up over them. And then a lot of people are now using cobble check dams, or they're using river cobble, which is visually perhaps a little more acceptable to the public, but those cobbles also move and they get pretty dirty pretty fast in terms of catching sediment and debris, whereas a concrete or cobble check dam, you won't have that debris sort of stuck in it and stuck on it. you can take it right off easily. The cobble check dams are a fair bit more maintenance, at least in my experience. And then vegetation is one of the most critical things to a lot of these systems. They are also an engineering component within the system, not just for transpiration and evapotranspiration practices, but also their roots are significant to providing infiltration channels and keeping the soil loose. They also slow down the stormwater. They help to cool the stormwater, et cetera. So the maintenance of the vegetation and the choice of vegetation is really significant. All the vegetation within it has to be appropriate for the use. And this is one of the most major challenges in trying to balance between aesthetics of these roadside facilities as well as other types of facilities, and then also recognizing the engineering component and the fact that these facilities are sometimes exceedingly wet, and when they're not wet, they might as well be a desert because the soil is so well drained. So a lot of people don't recognize that we have a very limited palette of plants that can handle those conditions, where most of the time they're dry and stressed, and every so often they have their feet wet for a day or two in there. And then, of course, we're trying to balance the aesthetics as well as things like sun and shade and sight lines and things of that nature. Keeping that vegetation well maintained, one of the most important things we're constantly doing is removing weeds. This is a really bad year for weeds in our area, so it took a lot more effort than some other years. And weeds are constantly popping up in the seasons. We've got major seasonal changes both within one season and within growth years. So the upper picture is the same facility in April and then May, and how quickly that changes. And then the lower facility is the difference between the first year when it was just built and the second year. And it's a little hard to see in those pictures, but those plants are now 6 feet tall. So very big difference in terms of what we see and how maintenance changes throughout the year. Just some pictures of typical weeds that we get in our region, everything from mile a minute to prickly cactus or prickly lettuce and foxtail grasses, but you name it, we'll get a weed in it, particularly because these are very dry, stressed environments with low nutrient contents. Lots of different things really like to get in there. We do all of our weeding by hand. We don't do any chemical weeding. The denser the planting we have, the easier it is to maintain. Obviously, keeping up with the weeding efforts means that it's not as bad the next time you show up. For mulch sources, it's really important to avoid municipal mulch compost and compost that can have a lot of seeds in them. And it's very rare that an herbicide would be used. That would be under an extreme situation that we would use an herbicide. Some pictures of some well-maintained vegetation. We cut back on sightly perennials and do aesthetic pruning throughout the year. But we prune typically in the spring, and we let things stand in the winter. And there's a couple reasons for this, but this is one of the reasons. So a lot of these facilities have mulch. This was a facility that had been pruned before winter, and this is what it looked like in midwinter because the mulch floats, moves around, and buries that. So if the standing plants are left there, the mulch doesn't move. But also because these are stormwater facilities, we have to recognize that there's a higher risk of root freeze if the plants are cut short, and water can then get into the roots and take on that freeze-thaw action and bust apart and damage the root ball of the plant. Then we might have a higher mortality rate within them. So we typically don't prune, do the extreme pruning until the spring. Another thing we do is we're constantly redistributing mulch. This is why having a denser planting really helps a lot, so that you don't need as much mulch, because it really doesn't matter what kind of source of mulch you use. They do all float. Some of them float better than others, and they can go out of the facility as well as bury plants within the facility. Watering is usually something that's only done until these plants are well established. After establishment, if they're drought stressed, it's very beneficial to be able to water them, but that often falls off of the radar as something to do. Perennials can be divided. If you have a facility that is lush and has some excess that you can take to one that's not as lush, you can divide perennials. And then, of course, replanting is a rather frequent exercise, particularly along the roadway LIDs. As I mentioned, these plants are an engineering component, and therefore they're subject to scour and sedimentation and petrochemicals and all sorts of things. So many of them are sort of sacrificed to the stormwater gods and need to be replaced either in full or on an annual basis. Mowing is a really important thing that happens around these facilities. It's important to inform folks who do the mowing to raise their blades and prevent scalping, and that when they're mowing to blow their clippings away from the facility, or if the clippings go into the facility, to then blow them out when they're done with their mowing practices. We don't want to have the grass clippings in the bios for several reasons. One is they contribute a heavy amount of nitrogen and phosphorus to the stormwater system, and the other is that they can clog up the facility by creating a dense, rotting organic material on the surface. Having a good edge around your facility will help and go a long way to keep the mowing personnel out of the facility. It makes their job a lot easier, and it makes your job a lot easier as well. It's important to never use herbicide. These are facilities where herbicide was used to create an edge, and that is not the way we want to do that in a stormwater facility. We have erosion that we have to fix from scour, and these are just some images of the types of erosion and undercutting that can happen within the facilities. So repatching those erosive areas, moving cobble back into place, rebuilding up around check dams is all common practice that we have in these. And then we like to educate people. It's really difficult now that LID and ESD is used right adjacent to parking lots and homes. You know, in a big storm, where are you going to put the snow? So I think a lot of times it's great to inform people not to put snow there, but the reality is you have to design for snowstorms in our area. And then the picture on the lower right, I'm not very tall, so you can't see me in this presentation, but in that picture, I'm standing in a pile of weeds in a stormwater LID that had just been built. Literally, the sign was still in it, and the neighbor or the neighbor's crew had put all of their leaves for leaf collection right into the facility, which creates a lot of damage as well as work for us. These are pictures of snowplow damages. So after winter, there's often a lot of repairs that have to be done from snow and snowplows. And then these are the tools. I've got a couple of slides. These are the things that are typically on the truck with our crews. So buckets, flat shovels, hose. Like I said, you could get creative and use a shop vac, brooms for cleaning up the work, both kinds of rakes, hard tine rakes as well as leaf rakes, wheelbarrows to get between the facilities and the trucks, garbage bags and trash picker-uppers are great. And then all the types of things that we need to prune and edge and keep the trimming down. And then we also want to have tools on our trucks. You'll find that getting a trench drain out or opening up a riser or taking a manhole cover off, you've got to think about the metal stuff that's needed to open and close those things. So having a manhole hook and having your wrenches and things like that are pretty important. It's also important to make sure that your crew is visible, particularly along roadways, but it also really helps no matter where you are, because there's something about a safety vest that seems to make people bug you less, because you look like you have a reason to be there and not just a stranger tromping around digging in the dirt. So making sure that's important. Real quick before I take some questions, we also just briefly the list of types of things that you need to maintain grass swales. There are a lot less maintenance, obviously, but you have to keep the inlets cleaned, and you have to keep out leaves and be careful about mowing and scalping. Tree boxes are becoming more common in a lot of places, and keeping the inlets clear on those and following the manufacturer's suggestions on what types of maintenance you have to do within the tree box is important. These are the things that we have to do in our tree boxes on an annual or biannual basis, and that includes remulching within a lot of these facilities. And then this is my last slide before I take questions and just do a quick couple design exercises. On our web page, we have 2-page fact sheets on how to do maintenance on all sorts of things, from submerged gravel wetlands to pervious pavement to sand filters, underground systems, some of the proprietary systems, as well as the rain gardens, microbioretentions, bioswales, etc. So those are really helpful if folks want to go to our website, which I have on this slide here at the bottom. So I want to take some questions, and it looks like we still have time for me to do some design review to talk about how design influences maintenance. So Sylvan, if there's questions right now, feel free to throw them out.
Great, thanks. Those look like wonderful resources that you have on your site. So we do have a question from Alex Crofta about weeds. Do the weeds have a negative functional impact on the system besides competition with plantings, or is it mostly aesthetic?
It's competition with plantings, number one, and aesthetics is number two. I don't think there's any research out there that shows a negative impact of the weeds. One of the problems with some of the weeds is that a lot of them are annual weeds, and those annual weeds then break down and they still have to come out of the facility, because if we leave them behind, we have again a high nitrogen and phosphorus input within the facility, because again, it's not like a regular garden where we could sort of till or compost it back into the facility. We actually want that stuff to go away, as well as the trimmings of any perennials that we have in there. So I would say competition is the biggest thing, as well as aesthetics, because depending what the weed is aesthetically, it can be a big problem. And some facilities that have gotten entirely taken over from weeds, there's really nothing growing in it. And one of the reasons that perennials are used in these is they're deep-rooted. They might have a higher evapotranspiration rate throughout the year. They provide some habitat within the facility, and having those larger root masses means they're also fracturing the soil and limiting the compaction of the soil and allowing for more infiltration down into the soil as well.
Okay. And Kevin Mendel asks, who performs maintenance and how much do you budget per site or square foot?
So the county does the maintenance of all the roadway LID, and then we have shared maintenance on school and park properties. For maintenance along there, for roadway LIDs, we budget approximately $2,100 per year per facility, and that averages out, and that number helps with also some of the structural maintenance that we have to do, like fixing erosion or replanting. If you take out the mulch and the fixing erosion and replanting and major repairs, the number would come down to about $1,800 a year. And again, we're out on a monthly basis, and each of them is very different in terms of size as well.
Okay. Those are the only two questions we have for now if you want to do some of the design.
Okay. Great. So what I want to do is just go through a couple of designs, and since you're not in the room, you're going to have to answer these questions in your head yourself, but I'm going to show you some designs on plan, and I want you to think about what you see in that might influence both the construction but also the maintenance and the effectiveness of the facility. So we're going to look at some construction sequencing and what the best practices are for construction sequencing. And one thing that's really important with construction sequencing is sediment control within the site, and that the contractor understands how stormwater works. So these are a couple of bioretention facilities that were breached by sediment from the surrounding landscape. So as you can see, the surrounding landscape is acres and acres of unstabilized soil. Now the contractor did what they could on this site. They actually had 2 layers of silt fence, and they had straw bales between the 2 layers of silt fence. But there's nothing that can keep back that amount of runoff from an unstabilized site in a very large storm. And these facilities were completely breached by exceedingly high sediment loads. And not only that, they had planted and mulched this stormwater facility before they even stabilized the surrounding area. So this entire facility had to have the top several inches taken off, the plants taken out, and the mulch taken out to repair that. So it's, again, really important to think about how these things are sequenced And why this was finished before the rest of the site is something that if you have any control over the construction and the sequencing and the design of these things, you may want to be having them think twice about that. So here's a plan. This is a plan view, and if you look at the red circle at the bottom, underneath that, that circle is over an island in a parking lot. So the spaces to the left are parking, and the area to the right is building on the right side. So within that circle, what you can see is you can see an inlet, and you can see large piped under drains within the facility that goes to an inlet. So if you look at this, I want you to think about if you were trying to build this facility, what do you see here, or rather, what do you not see here? This is the as-built, so this is what they were constructing the facility out of. So within that parking lot island that has fire retention, we then see that the pipes coming down to a riser. What we don't see from that riser is any construction elevations of where that riser was supposed to be and what height it was supposed to be at. So if we look at that and we think, well, how are they going to construct it, and how is this facility going to work? This is what we got. We got an inlet that the water comes off of the parking lot, and then there's a drain at grade, and water is never, ever gotten in 10 years. It's never gotten water into that facility because it's coming off of the parking lot. It's going straight into a drain. So if we go back and we look at that, we say, well, there's a couple things that should have been caught on this. And one is that outlet riser should have been in a totally different location, not right at the inlet. And it also should have had more specifics about the elevations of where that riser is and how it's functioning, because we got a non-functioning facility. So in terms of maintenance, this facility really, I don't want to maintain it. I don't want to budget for maintenance because I don't have anything to maintain, because this facility is not accepting water. So we would want to see this modified before anything changes there. Here's another one. This is a bioswale. If you look at the plan along the top and you see those sharp angled V's, that's a bioswale. And so the water is coming in through several curb. You can see the curb openings labeled on there. So it's coming off of a parking lot on one side and the bus lane on the other side. They have these curb openings going in. Water is flowing from the right-hand side down to the left-hand side. You can see those grades on the left-hand side, and then when you see it in side elevation at the bottom, you see an inlet down there, and you see some slopes without a lot of information. And then on the right-hand side, we see a detail of how those curb openings work. So you want to think again from when they constructed this and exactly how this is going to work. Everything's on a micro scale. So we've got these tiny little grade lines. It'd be really hard to construct this per plan, but when they do, this is what we got. So at the bottom of that swale, we have one of those curb inlets coming down. It's got essentially a wall below it, and you can see a woman standing in that gully down at the bottom, and you can see another curb cut up at the opening there. So again, going back to this, this is not really a buildable site, but they built it anyway, but they built it and now I have a major maintenance issue because I'm always going to have massive scour coming off of these inlets. There's no cobble or splash pad or anything that is preventing the undermining of some of these curb inlets. And then I've got this riser sort of buried in this deep little gully at the end because they did their best and they figured it out, but there really wasn't enough detail in the plan. And now my maintenance is more of a recovery effort as opposed to routine maintenance. Here's another one that I see this all the time, and this is something that is a major issue for me from a maintenance standpoint, because what I want to maintain are facilities that actually fill up with water. So here's a facility that drains off of a pervious parking lot. So there's some under drains that come in there as well, but inside all of those red circles are the curb openings. And then down the middle of the facility, that line, that dashed line that's down the middle of the facility is an underdrain. So there's a perforated underdrain that's in that facility. And then they also have sand windows. Within that farthest right-hand circle, you can see a sand window labeled. So again, I want you to think really briefly about whether or not you see any issues between the interaction of the inlets and the underdrain that are in here. And you wouldn't really notice this until you go out in the field. So these are some pictures of where the inlet comes in. And the picture on the right, I was standing out in the field during a 4-inch rainstorm, and there was not one drop of water in that facility. And the reason that there is no drop of water within the facility is this. This video shows water coming in, pouring in. Again, it's a 4-inch rainstorm, so we've got a massive amount of water. You can see the water coming down. It's coursing across the grass at this inlet, actually. There are several inlets on the side, but this is the one I was filming at the time. Water is coming down towards the facility. So I'm still thinking that this thing must be a giant puddle of water. You know, that there should be water ponding in here, which is what it was designed for. And then I get over into the facility. Here's another one of the inlets coming with water gushing into it as well. But when I get into the facility, there is no water. It's just gone. It's dry. It's kind of hard to see in this video, so I apologize. But you can see the mulch as I'm walking along there. This facility should have had 6 inches of ponding within it. Well, the reason that it's not ponding is we go back to the design, and we see that this underdrain goes straight down the middle of the facility. So water's coming in here. I've got a highly drained sandy soil, and it's literally shortcutting the facility. It's just going down through the sandy soil, it being intercepted by the underdrain and going back out to the storm drain. So all 3 of these inlets are totally short-circuiting the facility, and in a 4-inch rainstorm, I'm never going to have a drop of water except what falls from the sky. So I see this a lot, and I encourage everyone that works in maintenance to get involved in reviewing the designs of the facilities that they're going to be maintaining, because I now get everyone to correct these issues on their plans. Another quick one, the facility, this is again a design of it. This facility has sheet flow that comes off of a drive aisle, and when it sheets off of here, it's supposed to sheet into the facility. This is the roadway right here. This is a 3-to-1 slope, and this is a 3-to-1 slope. And what I have is this sort of issue. So this is a cafeteria distribution area, so there's daily deliveries from semis that are coming in here, and I have no flat bench right here. I literally have a 3-to-1 slope going straight down the facility, and if you can imagine a semi-truck coming in, not only is it dangerous for the semi-truck, but because the design did not accommodate for any sort of bench off the roadway, and again, it's on a micro scale, they didn't plan for it. Another quick one, you can't really see in this scale, but I put little red dots of where all the underdrain caps and observation wells are. And so if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there were supposed to be 8 caps in there. And now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have no idea at this point what they actually built in here, because this is the as-built plan and this is reality. So again, maintenance challenges that are a result of design challenges. This facility, let's look at this. So this is stormwater facility again. If we look at this riser that's right here, the detail for the riser, we have an issue when we put it at grade, because that riser is now at grade, and this is a stormwater facility, and all that stuff is now flowing into there. So what we do in maintenance sometimes, again, those who constructed it are gone, is we might have to do things like modify risers, because this one that was on the left here, a 5-gallon bucket went into that, was pushed into that facility by someone and completely clogged up the facility, caused a major issue. So we want to keep kids out of them, we want to keep debris out of them, we want to keep 5-gallon buckets out of them. This one, I'm not going to go into detail. It's too small for you to see the plan. But what you see on this plan is a seed mix. And this is the cross-section of the facility. And the cross-section has several inches of mulch here, then the soil, then some sand, then some gravel, and an underdrain. And then here's the areas, and then they have a seed mix. So again, a problem that folks never ever seem to notice is that seed does not grow over or under 3 inches of mulch. So we have rules within the county where everything has to be actually planted with gallon-sized plants unless it's designed differently, because we end up with facilities that have nothing growing in them whatsoever. I'm going to skip this one, but this one had a large erosion problem. And so just some quick lessons learned about looking at some of those designs is that there's really not one size that fits all for design or maintenance. Every site is different. But if all these practices are going to be designed at a micro scale, they really need to be reviewed and put on plans in micro scale so that we can actually have them built the way we can maintain them. And then field changes are always going to be necessary on the construction side, and that's where the folks who are in the maintenance programs really come into play, is that the folks in the maintenance programs really know what works after it's been built, and their input's really important in terms of design and design reviews. So I definitely encourage, as people are building or changing their programs, to bring their maintenance staff into those exercises. So I like to put this just in summary about maintenance, that design and construction, it's like a pregnancy. There's a lot of hard work. There's careful management to it, a lot of stress involved. But when you get to maintenance, it's like managing a horde of teenagers when school gets out. There's no telling what you signed up for, and their appetites and clothing allowances are large. So for me, that I get to deal with the teenagers, and it can be a lot of fun at times, but it can be rather difficult as well and challenging to build a program. So again, here is our website where you can get a lot of information on what we do within our program. We have all of those fact sheets as well as a lot of information. We also have a quarterly stormwater maintenance newsletter that you can sign up for. And I'm happy to take questions by email, but I think we have just a couple minutes left for any further questions.
Mary, I'm really impressed with how much effort goes into Montgomery County's program. It's incredible how many different facilities you all are maintaining. Do you have many crews that work on this?
Yeah, sure. We do have a underground contract that works on our underground, and then an above ground contract that works on all our above ground facilities, and then all of our LID stuff I have is within a crew within that above ground contract that we have. All contractors within the facility that work on any stormwater facility, it doesn't have to be the county maintained ones. If it's under permit and there is a work order that goes to the property owner after inspection that something has to be fixed, or at any time during the year if something has to be fixed, those contractors do have to go through, it's a little bit like a certification program that the county has to let them know how those systems work, and all those contractors know that when a property owner gives them a work order, they have to come back to our inspectors and talk about what that work is, because our inspectors are also enforcing that the work gets done. So there is a long list of contractors. They're not endorsed by the county, but they are certified by the county to do work on stormwater facilities.
Okay. All right, so Ethan Beeson asks, are there any challenges to installing sod in the swales if the sand filter is not covered?
Is there any challenge to sod?
To installing sod in the swales if the sand filter is not covered.
Oh, okay. So the bioswales have a biomedia mix of soils that are in them, and then there's usually a layer of either construction sand or number 7 or number 8 stone that then is like a choking course over a 57 stone. That's how a lot of these are sort of typically built. And installation of sod just means that you have to make sure that the sod is able to be established in those grass swales. So you might have to prevent water from going into those grass swales until you get the sod established. Once the sod is established, it's usually not an issue. Okay.
There was also a question about what is a sand window?
A sand window, so a sand window is basically just it's like an elevator of sand that goes, construction sand that goes from the surface down to that gravel layer underneath, and engineers often would use them because they were concerned that water would sit on the surface for too long and clog. So the sand window expedites shunting water down into the storage layer of the facility.
Huh, okay. And then how would you recommend fixing the LID that was infiltrating the sandy soil before getting to the plants, one of the design examples you gave?
That's a great question. There are risers that are the outlets to the facility. So there are 6-inch under drains, and those under drain pipes go into a concrete riser. And that concrete riser then has a larger pipe that goes out to the storm drain. So in that scenario, the under drain within the riser, we could cap the under drain, and we could cap it so it prevents any water from coming out, or we could cap it and then just drill a small hole within it so that it can only slowly leach the water out of that under drain. That's probably the easiest way to keep the water from going out that fast.
Okay. Alex Crofta says, thanks, and can you explain conservation landscapes that were mentioned in one of the first slides?
Yeah, so conservation landscapes are a term that our Rainscapes group typically uses, and a lot of other people use them. But conservation landscapes are really just areas that take small amounts of stormwater and use that stormwater to irrigate a garden type of area. So they're not necessarily depressed into a bowl like a rain garden or a bioretention would be. They can often be a little bit flatter, but a lot of people will say put in a conservation landscape. They'll just put in a landscaped area and then disconnect one of their roof drains and allow that roof drain to funnel water towards the garden and allow the garden plants and trees to take up the water.
Okay. We have a question here. Any experience with specifying weed controls or weed-free mixes in association with amended/bioretention soils or other methods to obtain weed-free materials?
Well, so mulch is the main thing that can be an issue, and again, that's typically going to come through like a compost or a municipal mulch that's not straight up. If you have straight up shredded bark mulch, it's typically, even if it has some weed seeds in it, because you're putting in a 2 to 3 inch layer of it on, again, the seeds can't necessarily germinate over or under that. So the mulch during the establishment, whether there's weeds in the biomix or whether there's weeds within the mulch, are typically suppressed a lot by the mulch. And then the biomedia soils, to be honest, I think they're pretty dead. There is some compost in some of them, and there's topsoil in some of them, but as we all know, if topsoil is stored, it biologically goes a little bit sterile, so there may not be, that heavy of a use. And also a lot of these are more than 60% sand in that mix. So the sand is relatively sterile. So I think if you're using conventional hardwood shredded mulch to initiate the facility, those weed seeds are not going to be a huge problem.
Okay. And then going back to the grass swales, is there an issue with scum covering the plants or turf grass after when water subsides after a rain event?
Not typically. Again, if it's a source that comes off of a roadway, you want to keep cleaning the inlets and keep the sediment out of there. But scum is not typically an issue, particularly if these facilities are on a regular mowing basis. It's not too much different than a lawn and a grass swale.
Okay. Well, that was the last question. So again, I want to thank Mary for your presentation and all the attendees for tuning in.